And welcome everybody to this amazing conference. This has been great all day. What I'm going to ask is if you haven't switched your mode into speaker mode, I think that would help with being able to see our panelists when they speak and they respond to the questions. So if you could do that at this point, that would be great. That way you can see all of our panelists as they're talking. And so I have the esteemed privilege of being able to introduce some phenomenal panelists today. In an area that is near and dear to my heart, as you can tell, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is where I have been grounded since being a K-12 teacher, well into my research in higher education. So I am extremely honored to be able to introduce this panel to you. So let's start with our first presenter, our first panelist. Our first panelist is Lesley Slaton Brown. She is the VP and Chief Diversity Officer for HP Incorporated. She is also the co-founder of Curated Pathways to Innovation. And every day, Lesley Brown inspires and drives C-suite leaders to embed diversity and inclusion strategies across their organizations and demonstrate the impact from the boardroom to the business side of the business unit side of the house. So Lesley's motto is time for talk is over. She's a woman after my own heart. Time for action is now. She has led key efforts to address the digital divide and to build sustainable enterprise in Senegal, West Africa, and is very passionate about social impact and human rights. She currently serves on the National Historically Black College and University Business Deans Roundtable and the Black Compute Her Advisory Board, and is on the University of California Merced Foundation Board of Trustees. Lesley has co-founded the Curated Pathways to Innovation, CPI, which is a collective impact model focused on broadening participation and access for minorities and women in STEM education and careers. And so we thank you, Ms. Brown, for joining us today. Our second panelist is Adam Hill. Adam Hill serves as the Executive Director for Forsyth Futures. Adam, as the Executive Director, provides action-oriented data analysis and reporting services to organizations within Forsyth County. Mr. Hill began this work at Forsyth Futures by performing the data management and research responsibilities for Forsyth Promise, which was a community-wide education partnership focused on improving outcomes for children and students from birth to career. His role then expanded to overseas with the organization's work in being able to support similar data-driven initiatives within the community, such as an age-friendly Forsyth and initiative, the Asset Building Coalition. But now as the Executive Director, Adam is very passionate and committed to working in communities and transforming research and data into action that will yield positive outcomes for all people in Forsyth County. And so, Mr. Hill, we thank you so very much for being on our panel today. Our third panelist is Dr. Samantha-Rae Dickinson. She is a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist, and has been for the past 11 years and some change, and is also engaged in professional educational experiences with many different industries, including biomedical science and research, public health education. She serves as a CEO and lead consultant at her firm, DSRD Consulting. She helps organizations to go from being performative about DEI to being intentional by investigating in their marginalized employment and increasing employee engagement. I apologize. Dr. Dickinson's work has been featured in Forbes. She has also been a guest on the Roland Martin Show, where she discussed systemic racism and microaggressions that Black people face. Dr. Dickinson graduated from the University of New England as the youngest doctoral graduate in the Educational Leadership Program and received her certificate in DEI, or Diversity Inclusion, from Cornell University. And so, Dr. Dickinson, we thank you for being on this esteemed panel today. And our last panelist, and you all see the robustness of this panel, just absolutely amazing. So our last panelist is the esteemed Dr. James B. Stewart, who is a professor emeritus at Penn State University. My daughter's wearing a Penn State sweatshirt right now, but that's okay. She just got really excited. Okay, so at Penn State, he also served as the Vice Provost for Education, Equity, and the Director for the Black Studies Program. As the Vice Provost, he was responsible for planning, developing, coordinating, articulating, and advocating the university's goals, policies, and procedures pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion. He has served as a consultant on DEI issues for several universities and the department, as well as the Department of Defense. Dr. Stewart has authored, co-authored, edited, co-edited 13 monographs, including Introduction to African American Studies, Transdisciplinary Approaches and Implications. He has served as the president of 3 national professional organizations, to include the National Economic Association, the National Council for Black Studies, and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. So again, attendees, guests, what a phenomenal panel we have before us today, a richness of information and experience. And so we are really excited about this conversation that we're going to have today. And it's going to feel like a conversational tone, this panel. So for my panelists, so get back, get comfortable. Okay? This is a safe space. We would like transparent answers. What we do in this field and what we're getting from this conference is so that we can have that intentional impact when we leave. And so we thank you all so very much for joining us. And we're just going to get right into our first question for each of you. So our question is, could you each, or can each of you provide a quick description of your work in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion? So how is it, what is it you see that you do in your work? And give us just a quick overview of that. And anyone can feel free to jump in. I'll just moderate between you all.
I'm happy to go. Hi, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Erin, and I'm so excited to join this such esteemed panel. As VP and Chief Diversity Officer for HP, part of the focus that I have is really looking at, a portion of it is really kind of about corporate social responsibility. And I actually see my role as deeply embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion into the strategy of the company. And so not just program by program and donation by donation, but making sure that I'm driving it deep into the work that we do and priorities for the company at the highest level. And so I've started with ensuring that we have a diverse board of directors, because the board of directors influences greatly the direction and guidance and vision for the company, as well as our senior most level of the company. And so it's top to bottom and bottom to top. And so for me, it's about devising this infrastructure and a very dynamic ecosystem in order to embed diversity that's increasing diversity of representation within the company, that is about equity, ensuring that we're breaking through some of the systemic issues that exist and prevent us from one, even being attracted to the tech industry, to being selected for jobs at HP and companies like, HP tech companies, to development and nominations for promotional opportunities. And so at every turn, I'm looking at what the system is and ensuring that we're disrupting that within the company. So it's the diversity, it's the equity, and then ultimately it is about how do we create a space in which we can come, bring our beautiful selves and thrive. Our talents are utilized, our voices are heard, the perspective that we bring from our unique culture, experiences, education, all of those different things into the workplace. And then there's a second part that happened in my job, and I think many others, and that is in 2020, after kind of George Floyd happened, is the racial equality piece of it, the social justice aspect of it. I'm fortunate to work for a tech company that is driving VR. And so there's things that we can do with partnering with police forces and municipalities, a lot that we can do in driving legislation and have done over 80 plus years in legislation. And so I feel like the scope of my work is full service, from that standpoint. I'm just now thankful for the opportunity for us to now have the hard conversations about the race issues. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, it's phenomenal. Other panelists?
Hi, everyone. I can go next. I do something similar to what Ms. Brown, Lesley just explained. So prior to now, I was the principal strategist at NIH, where I oversaw the Black employee life cycle, basically. And what that looked like in that position was looking at the recruitment process, the hiring process, even the application process promotion and tenure, separation rates, just representation in leadership positions and across the entire agency as it relates specifically to the Black employees. And so we looked at the data as it relates to those specific areas to highlight any gaps that may be preventing the equity of, or the inclusion of all the Black employees across the agency. And so right before, I actually just transitioned from that position. I haven't officially announced it, but I am now the DEI director at Goodwill. And right before I transitioned to that position, I was in the process of developing a strategic plan for the agency to kind of fill in those gaps. And I do something a little bit similar, but more specific and database in my consulting firm. And so what I do is I look at companies' mission statement and I develop a 3-year DEI strategy in alignment with their mission, so that, similarly to what Lesley said, so that they can be intentional about their efforts as it relates to D&I instead of like reactionary or performative, just like checking the boxes. And I do that by, I have a framework, and it includes developing a DEI foundation, which includes value statements, a vision and a mission specific to DEI in alignment with their overarching mission. It includes doing like a climate assessment or equity audit, which is like surveying their employees to get qualitative data back. I look at representation and demographic data, so that's the quantitative piece. Compile it all together, develop some themes, and use those themes to make some SMART goals and objectives, and also activities around those SMART goals so that they can be intentional about their efforts. And yeah, that's a synopsis of pretty much what I do. So the overarching goal is to make sure that companies are being intentional and not performative. And so it becomes a natural mode of operation for them.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
I'll go next. You already told them what I used to do. since I'm not working anymore as an employee. When I was Vice Provost for Education and Equity, part of my responsibility was to put together a diversity strategic plan that encompassed our 21 campuses, including the main campus. And many of the things that the previous speakers have talked about were under my control. In addition, I could hold units accountable. So I was high enough in the organization to be able to tell people what to do and to hold their feet to the fire. But I think what's more important now, what I do is, for the last 15 years, I've been working with the Pittsburgh Public School System as part of what's called an Equity Advisory Panel, which is responsible for trying to deal with the achievement gap. And that the achievement gap is important if we're talking about diversifying this field, because the gap is significant in math, beginning with the 3rd grade. So I've been fighting that battle, and that's been a much more difficult battle than what I did in higher education. I also do some consulting work that involves trying to empower communities to be knowledgeable about how technology and science impact them and provide some sort of community level educational process. So I'll just stop there.
All right, I can jump in. So I'm with Forsyth Futures. We're based here in Forsyth County. We're a nonprofit that provides community data and research on the community. And really, our goal is how can we use that information to inform decision-making around policies, how we're using our resources, and what services we're providing as a community in education, health, and financial and economic stability. So really our work is how can we shine a light on the inequities we're seeing, and what really is contributing to those inequities across those systems I named: education, health, and employment, and really helping provide that information to institutions that will help them think about how they can change their systems and work towards improving quality of life across the county. Again, our goal is how can we use the research to determine those systemic issues that help create more equitable outcomes and help ensure inclusion of community members in planning and decision-making processes. So we help bring that data to those processes and institutions across the community.
It's amazing. So attendees, you all heard everyone has a consulting firm right now. Everyone is doing some service. So if there is something that resonates with a need that you might have at your institution, please reach out to these panelists. I know, Mr. Hill, you work exclusively in Forsyth, but I'm sure that your model of how you use Forsyth data can go to other cities as well, how they can use their data as well to make these types of impacts in diversity and equity. So we're going to transition into our next question. So in the work and the fields that you all are in, have you all seen a rise in the importance of diversity or data that speaks to diversity? And what do you all think has contributed to that, if you do believe that a rise has occurred in that importance?
I can take a stab at this first. So the short answer is yes. So DEI is the center of attention, as we're all aware of. We see it in all the headlines across everywhere on social media, and that's trickling down into professional settings. So companies are seeing that employees really do hold the power and consumers hold the power. I think what brought about this attention were the protests that were sparked from the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor last year. I think that being that those murders happened during a pandemic, we were all at home. A lot of folks had more time to learn about DEI and sort of like think critically about like systemic racism and had the time to do that type of research. So with more knowledge and with being at home, people felt kind of, they were fed up, to be blunt. Marginalized groups, especially Black and Asian Americans, they just have had enough. So there was a recent study that I just read that said that 80% of employees are willing to quit their jobs if DEI isn't a priority. And if it's very evident that that's not a priority, they'll leave. And so I think companies are seeing that this is the case. And I hate to say this, and I don't like to promote or monetize DEI, but the fact of the matter is a lot of companies and leadership value their bottom line and ROIs. And so they're seeing the correlation. So I think that's why companies are starting to prioritize DEI. That's my take on things.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of that. I think that, the incident last year with George Floyd and with Breonna Taylor and with others, but also, prior, I mean, we've been seeing this is not new to us. But we were in a state, being in quarantine, where I think people just were paralyzed. I personally was paralyzed watching that video and couldn't watch the whole thing literally until the trial occurred. I was never able to even watch the whole thing. I see a couple of things happening. I see, I'm fortunate to work for a company that has had 80 years investment in this space. And even with 80 years investment in this space, we're still not at the numbers we should be at. And part of that is that I see a revolving door happening in that we're bringing people through. We do a lot of work with HBCUs. We have HBCU business challenges. We have placement of product on campuses in order to start building apprenticeship and internship type programs. And even in light of all of that, we still are not where we need to be. I don't like the checkbox exercise either that Dr. Samantha referred to. I believe that when we think about customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction are completely interwoven. And so you have to be able to look at who's buying your product, who's making investments in your product. And Dr. Samantha is right on the money in that customers demand that this be a priority for companies. And so when we work with commercial organizations that are buying our products for their workplace, they're asking, like, what are you doing? What are you doing for Black and for Brown, for Indigenous? What are you doing for it? You know, kind of the list goes on. And so I think that that demand is, and I would say 2015-ish, in the Silicon Valley, when Rainbow Push Coalition came in and bought up a share of stock so that they could have the mic, you know, at these shareholder meetings, and they really pushed for that. But I see just in this past year, even more people being quote unquote woke. And I don't care where you are on the journey, just get on a journey, right? To this and to solving this. And then you still have the naysayers, the people that think for some reason that humanity is liberal. It's liberal mindset. And so we're kind of juggling all of these aspects right now. But I think that I feel hopeful in that we're on that journey to do things more, better, faster, be more aggressive, be more bolder, and get more upstanders in the conversation as well.
Let me answer a little differently. About 2 weeks, well, maybe 3 weeks ago, Google contacted me, one of the units within Google or Alphabet now. And what they wanted to talk about was how could they start developing some algorithms to help them better understand systematic racism. And so I do research, and I'm an economist by advanced training. And so they asked me to do a presentation to their group, which I did. And as follow-up, been working with a couple of the staff members there that are working in sort of looking at the ways in which particular occupations tend to marginalize certain groups. So in addition to sort of the consumer dimensions of it, there's also dimensions about how to understand the social trajectories. What is the future going to look like as it relates to how people are going to interact with each other? And it's interesting that and this is the X corporation within Google, that they have the freedom to be able to do this type of research, that they're not hamstrung by the need to improve the bottom line for the organization, that they just sort of give, and hopefully we can tap into that, because we want to make sure that we are active part of the future as well.
Yeah, and related to some of what you were saying there is, you know, I'm coming from a research background, and I'd say yes, the importance of diversity is coming up a lot in research, in that we need more diverse perspectives in determining what our research questions are. And to James's point, you know, I think historically we tend to study individuals and families and really shine the light on deficits. So I think there's a need to think about how we're developing our research questions, bringing more people into that process, and starting to better study our systems and how they are having an impact on individuals and families. So I think there's really a huge need to include more perspectives in how we're determining our research agendas and what we're ultimately studying and trying to understand, because that ultimately directs the focus and the attention of our interventions and resources.
Excellent. So, and Dr. Deb, I'm going to go off script with this one. And we have a question from the audience as well. So in that, so there's a theory, the anti-deficit achievement framework, right? And this theory that we should start asking the research questions from a model or from a perspective where we're not looking for the deficits all the time in our minoritized groups, right? And so that's what ADF does. It allows you to shape that way. Do you all, in your expertise, and you know, Lesley, you spoke to this as students coming in but not staying, right? And Sam, you spoke to embedding it into the missions and the statements and the visions of the companies. Adam, you know, the use of the data to stop looking at the individual people, right? But then, of course, you know, James, Google is trying to look at it from an algorithmic standpoint. So do you all feel as though how we're looking at data and how we're approaching this is changing because the value in diversity is changing, or do you think one is driving the other?
I love that question. And although I'm not on the research side like Adam, we do internal research. We do listening sessions, both quantitative, we do qualitative as well. And one of the interesting things is there's a question that we ask of, what do you think, what is your impression of the company? How do you feel about the company today? And then what would you like to see the company be? Right. And typically, I mean, HP is known for a great culture and everything. And typically we get very positive things there. So then we take it one more step and we'll ask the question of, do you intend to leave the company at any, in the near term? And most of the time, probably 94 to 96% of the people will say, absolutely not. Great culture, love the company. But then when, somebody comes knocking, right? Google, Facebook, you name it, they come knocking. And then we ultimately see our attrition numbers. And it's just like, what just happened? Like 96 of you said you will not leave, but yet. And so I think that the dynamic of what I see happening in the quest for more diversity, and really in the tech industry in particular, is we're just moving sand around in the sandbox, because, we're not bringing in new talent and building that pipeline to the levels that I'd like to see us do it. We're just moving people around from one company to the next company. So I say that to say that when we think about the research that we are doing, because of the demand of diversity in the tech industry, we need to really make a concerted effort to kind of keep clicking down a few levels, on the questions that we're asking, in order to really see, like, there are some drivers that you might think you're going to stay now, but 2 weeks from now, when somebody comes knocking, there you go, because they're offering you more, and they're throwing some bonus and stock and all these kind of glitz and glamour on the table. So.
And I'll jump in. I don't know that we're quite there yet in adjusting and adapting our research approaches, because engaging community in the process and helping them determine what are the key questions we're trying to answer as a community, that takes longer. It may take more resources to follow that type of approach. So I think there also needs to be just shifts in how we pay for research and how long we expect things to take. And we can't have as many preconceived notions about what direction the research will go in. We need to be able to adapt and adjust. So I think there's a lot that needs to change in terms of how we approach research and collecting data and information, to make it more inclusive and to bring in more diverse perspectives into the process.
Africana studies emerged in the late 1960s to combat the whole deficit approach to looking at the experiences of people of African descent. Africana studies focuses on agency and empowerment, and that is the mindset from which I think a lot of the research needs to be conducted. We've obviously made significant strides in Africana studies over the last 50 years, but there's still much more that could be done in terms of infusing the work that's being done in a variety of areas, including data science and policy analysis.
Wow, that segues really well into our third question, which is about STEM and STEM related areas. So our next question, so we've seen that STEM and STEM related areas are still struggling, right? They're still struggling to meet parity for gender minority groups, racial and ethnic minority groups, and then my background, individuals with exceptionalities. So from you all's vantage point, what do you believe are some of those major contributors to the slow growth that we've seen, right? So Lesley, you spoke about, we're just moving sand around, right? So what do you think is contributing to us not making more sand?
To me, honestly, I think it is the culture in these companies and in these institutions. A lot of people who are already there, marginalized people, experience so many microaggressions, and they just get tired and burnt out. So they leave, they transition fields, or there's no pay equity, so they move. And lack of representation in leadership roles, for example, don't necessarily encourage the younger generation or people who are newer to the field to want to enter into the field, because they might automatically think that, well, this is not inclusive, or they don't welcome my kind or someone like me. So I think that's one thing. The next I would say is a lot of bias at all points of the employee life cycle. So in recruitment, in the application process, in hiring, the promotion and tenure processes, grant application process, even publishing, when you're trying to get your articles and research published, there's so much bias, so many hurdles to overcome. It doesn't welcome people into the field. It's like, I just have to do so much to excel in my career that I don't even want to do this anymore. To me, I think that may be two of the contributing factors.
And I'll, Dr. Lynch, I'm going to switch hats really quick. And so I'm going to put on my nonprofit hat. And some of the research that I did as we were forming curated pathways to innovation is an understanding of, and I have a marketing background in marketing analytics, is looking at a value chain, for example, and understanding what are the inhibitors of students, first and foremost, entering into being excited about, being inspired, and math as the catalyst to most STEM careers and education and careers. And we see as early as like third grade, girls and minorities stop raising their hands. And so when we think about the influencers, like who are the people that influence them? It's typically teachers, it's parents first, and then teachers second. And so there's some work in the system and the structure in and of itself to pull through to the pipeline. I think that we need to tend to in some ways. And then there's also, we look at data that shows, like, I think it's 62%, don't quote me on this because it's really old now, but like 62% of brown and Black men, boys that go into STEM careers and designate themselves as I'm going into computer science or engineering or whatever, fall out of the system. And typically they will drop out of school. Black girls, brown girls will typically just come up with another emphasis, another degree. And so when boys fall out, we usually see them come back in through what we call, I'll just call it alternative means, by lack of a better word, but you see them go through from the military to for-profit schools, those types of things, community college even. And so there's something wrong in the system. There's a lot of things wrong in the system that need to be fixed in order for us to see that pipeline come through confidently. And where you have, when you look at high school and AP courses, advanced placement courses, and teacher recommendations, those tend to err on more non-minorities being recommended for those, those courses. And so there's just a lot of dynamics that are at play in our structure and the system that we still need to combat.
I think that is absolutely correct. Everything that you pointed to. And for me, the way in which they teach mathematics in the elementary and middle schools is horrendous in terms of creating any type of interest or enthusiasm. I work with my grandkids, and I can't believe some of the pedagogies that they use. I think there's also the issue that was raised earlier, is one of mentoring. if you don't have a good mentor, and not just one mentor, a network of mentors, you'll get lost because the system simply isn't designed to be able to provide the type of support that is needed if you come from particular types of backgrounds.
Yeah, I think Lesley, you said it much better than I was going to say it. But yeah, adults have narratives in their heads of who kids are going to be, and then that plays out in the youth, and who they become. So, I mean, that's just going to take time and effort and energy to change those narratives in the adults that are around the kids. In the narratives that they have in their heads about who that kid can be, that will just take time and energy and effort.
So that sparks just so many ideas, you know, as a broadening participation researcher, like maybe we've been going about this the wrong way, right? Maybe we've been, you know, trying to get to the kids, and really we just really need to focus on enculturating their parents into, you know, empowering them to be academic mentors, right? In some sort of way to draw our kids into being excited about STEM and STEM related activities, as my daughter is sucking her teeth because she wants to be a mathematical scientist or engineer. So at Penn State, but you know, that's okay. So she knows it's true. So for our last question around this area, so we're still staying in this STEM space in context of DEI. So do you all feel as though, or can you envision data sciences as a field that can be leveraged using large data sets to be able to assess situations? And can data science have a role in contributing to DEI work?
I think there are two ways that I see that happening. One is in the research topics that data scientists investigate. If they're focused on sort of community empowerment, addressing community needs, et cetera, that will draw more people into the field. But secondly, let me put it this way. You can tell from my gray hair that I'm the oldest person on the panel. So when I was in undergraduate school, I had to do regressions and stuff using a Frieden calculator. I know you all don't even know what a Frieden calculator is, but it's a big, huge machine where you type the numbers in. So that was before there was any type of statistical packages. So then we moved to statistical packages where you're still inputting the data manually. We need to develop some new AI type of interfaces that facilitate the access to the technologies that are used to look at the data, that'll make it more accessible for people that have been left out. So I'll just say that.
Dr. Stewart, I love your gray hair, by the way. I think, Dr. Lynch, I think absolutely. We look at, in many of our intern hires to date are data scientists. And because, and you heard me as I started, I said, hey, we make sure that we deeply embed the diversity work into our business strategy. So it's what our board, it's what our CEO was talking about when we have discrepancies of, you know, why are you politicizing this stuff? It's like, because we're a sustainable and just company, and here's what our focus is. And so, so data science is absolutely critical. And I actually believe that I don't care what your degree is in, I think there's an element of data science that should be a part of that. We don't do anything without starting with the data in order to build the story. The story then helps form and shape the strategy. The strategies build the tactics build, you know, our result, the impact that we're trying to drive. So it all ties together. So I absolutely think so, yes.
Well, I'd just say, yes, certainly leveraging data science to better study our systems and policies, and how they're kind of reinforcing and recreating the outcomes we're seeing, you know, particularly in our education systems. So really looking at things like disproportionate discipline, what are the policies behind that? How is discipline being carried out differentially? So you leveraging data and research and data science to unravel kind of our systems and policies that are creating, these inequitable outcomes.
Dr. Dickinson, you add, because if not, I have a follow-up, and then we're going to take some questions from the floor.
I could just repeat what everybody else said. I mean, like I said earlier, to be intentional, you need a strategy. That's how I've seen it work in professional settings. And to have a strategy, it has to be informed by data. As Lesley just said, data scientists help us all understand like why things happen the way they happen. So for example, if we don't see a representation of marginalized groups in leadership positions, we have to understand why. We have to understand, does it start with the recruitment process, or does it start at the promotion within the promotion process? Are we hiring people like from outside into leadership positions, or are people progressing into leadership positions? Do people have the adequate resources and support? Is there bias in the promotion process? And using qualitative and quantitative data to assess those things will help us understand like that flow. That's just one example, but yes, the short answer is yes, it's definitely important and definitely can intersect in the DEI space.
Absolutely, that's such a powerful statement. One of the first areas that I worked in was looking at the attrition rates of Black faculty in the academy. And 1 out of 9 Black faculty members makes it to full professor, right? That's a 90% attrition rate, right? So trying to figure out why that is. I did that for a very long time. So we have some questions from the floor. So one of our esteemed colleagues, Dr. Monell, has asked, how do we ensure that the apparent trendy approach to addressing the diversity, particularly in the workplace, how do we sustain it, right? So once the television goes off, will it still be relevant to the stakeholders? Will they still find value in it? I guess this kind of speaks to what my follow-up question was, if we have all of these data, right, that we've used and leveraged through large data sets, machine learning to tell us, look, objectively, this is an issue. This is what systemic racism looks like according to the data, right? So how do you make people care? And when the TVs are off and all this, how do we continue to sustain that?
Yeah, the thing I love about the question is, and we asked this, and Dr. Samantha, Dr. Dickinson probably can support me on this, is when we experienced George Floyd front and center, we said, you know what, how do we take this from a moment to a movement, right? How do we really look at how we bring longevity into, and I think that for me, it's the data. It's bringing and continuing to showcase the data and then tell the stories, because there's stories behind that data that help illustrate story after story after story. And so the balance that we have is, and especially in the tech industry, is you have a lot of very analytical people, but there also is, how do you take it from knowing and thinking to feeling, to the heart level, and then take it to doing, and that's the action. And so the work that we're doing day to day is to address those 3 levels of know, feel, do, in order for this to be longer term.
I agree.
I knew you would.
I would just add that it really depends on the person you're talking to, because there are some people who just don't care. No matter what you do, no matter what kind of story you tell, they just won't care. There are other people who just look at the data and they automatically get it. There are other people who you have to like use bottom line and return on investment and show like the correlation between creating inclusive workspaces and retaining your staff, so you don't have to spend revenue to retrain, hire, and post those jobs. So showing that type of data will get people to care. So it really just depends on the person, honestly. And then another thing is, not everyone will care. So we just have to be okay with that. The goal is to try to get the majority of people, and the people in power who can make decisions, care. And hopefully by using the process that Lesley just explained, which I think a good amount of DEI, people in the DEI space use that same type of process, try to use like empathy to get people to understand and connect with why inclusivity and being equitable is important. So that's my tidbit.
Yeah, I think I'd agree and add like that adding layers of context to the data helps people better understand it. So if we add kind of historical context about this is how we got to this point in time, if we add those stories so it brings it more to life and brings some emotion to it, I think that can keep people energized around it and just help people better understand how we got to where we are today. If you just put out the data alone, sometimes that can be that can just reinforce internal narratives people have. So trying to layer other components of information that help tell the full story, I think will hopefully keep it alive and moving.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Dr. Stewart, did you have final thoughts? Our provost is going to hop in.
Yeah. Well, I think the point was raised earlier that it has to be all through the organization from top to bottom. I'm on the board of trustees of a local college, so I can hold the president accountable to make sure that all of the officers within the institution are doing what they need to do as it relates. And so, so I think we need to make sure we have people on the board and CEOs and so forth.
Absolutely. Thank you. We cannot thank you all enough for your time today, for your insights, your expertise, for the work that you're doing in this space. And for that, we are so grateful for your contributions in this space. At this time, we want to thank you all, and we were going to finish out this panel. We will turn it back over to Dr. Deb and have our wrap up for the day.